been revealed that your tax dollars are being used to censor you in a way that you didn't know about. Hello, my beautiful freedom-loving friend, and welcome back to the JP Reacts channel, where we like to call out the lies, hypocrisy, and corruption of tyrants, shine the light of awareness on woke absurdities, and highlight the amazing work of other freedom fighters. At the core of freedom, of course, is free speech. Did you ever hear the Constitution? It's a thing, it's kind of important, and it names our first constitutional right as Americans as freedom of speech. The government shall not infringe on freedom of speech. Period. No other way to spin it. The government shall not infringe on our freedom of speech. We have seen with the Twitter files, they absolutely have. But there's a new way they've been doing it. But extra deviously is considering that you and I are funding the government. We are paying the government to censor us. That is a very poor choice of employment. Who we're hiring, very poor choices, because the employees, the government, newsflash, the government is here to serve us. They work for us. A lot of people in the government have lost sight of that. They're trying to use us to serve their agenda, but they kind of forget, no, they work for us. So it's just like if you ran a small business, and you realize, oh, I have an employee that's stealing from me. They have misconduct. They're doing something against me. I am paying them to hurt me and my business. What would you do in that situation? You'd fire them right away. That's what needs to be done. So let's get at today's story, the new way that I sure as heck didn't know about, you may not have known about, how the government has been using our money to censor us. Going to Zero Hedge, reposting an article authored by Brian Young via the Epoch Times. University of Texas students behind censorship project targeting conservative news outlets. Which, by the way, like, whoa, college students actually in a project of censorship. Who would have thought? I didn't know college students got an indoctrination where they're taught to have blue hair, not believe in biology, and hate America. Very shocking that this is happening. So let's get into this. The Global Disinformation Index, or GDI, such a thing exists. The Global Misinformation Index. Apparently it rates how misinformation-y something is. Thank God. In other words, thought police. Cool. We need another branch of 1984 law enforcement. So the Global Disinformation Index's report, which called for the blacklisting of conservative news organizations, was written up by students under the direction of academics working at the University of Texas at Austin's Global Disinformation Lab. Why the hell does Austin have a Global Disinformation Lab? Article goes on. In the Disinformation Index, the group labeled several conservative media companies as the riskiest. In a minute, when we get to the conservative news outlets that were labeled the riskiest, you'll say like, oh yeah, those are probably the ones that like we see as the best sources of truth. Side note, just reaffirming the lesson you and I know about, when the thought police are labeling something as false or misinformation, probably about 9 times out of 10, you can just reverse psychology that. It's like, oh, that's the truest thing. What they said was false, that's going to be the truest thing. What they say is misinformation, that's going to be the truest thing. What they say is good old-fashioned information, okay, now we want to get suspicious and consider that to be false. The academics in charge of the lab allegedly held an anti-conservative bias. You think? In readings of internal communications, along with several other accusations found in over 1,000 pages of documents reviewed by the Federalists. Conservative news outlets such as American Spectator, Newsmax, The Federalist, American Conservative, One America News, The Blaze, The Daily Wire, Real Clear Politics, Reason, and the New York Post generally had the lowest ratings. Not too surprising. What do they have in common? Obviously, they come from a conservative perspective, so it makes sense that a group of woke indoctrinated students would be like, well, of course they have the misinformation. Let's blacklist them. Let's give them a low, GDI rating. In contrast, left-leaning news publications like the New York Times and CNN were among the top 10 least risky of disinformation in their rating system. Whoa! If anybody calls CNN least risky when it comes to misinformation, their mind is either captured or they need to go directly to a mental hospital. And this part's relevant too. The GDI, or Global Disinformation Index, sold its lists to marketing organizations, which led to companies pulling advertisements from blacklisted outlets and thus starving them of funding. So this little group of GDI, hey, we tell you what news outlets are misinformation. Super dangerous. So according to their list, advertisers would then make advertising decisions and advertise less with the media outlets that are labeled to be riskiest with misinformation. Therefore, what we see is it's basically a weaponized tactic against conservative news outlets to basically starve them of funding, get less money in, obviously trying to hurt them and hurt what is the counter to the propaganda narrative that's spoon-fed to us every time we turn around. Because we could say, like, hey, if the GDI called my channel full of misinformation, I would take that as a compliment. It's like, cool, I put zero relevance into what you say other than like thinking the exact opposite of what you say. So you say I'm full of crap, I take that as a compliment that I'm doing a pretty good job of conveying accurate information. So I wouldn't care about that. But the fact that advertisers look at this blacklist, now it actually hurts the companies. Now, here's where we get very unconstitutional. Listen to this. The government-funded National Endowment for Democracy was also caught granting GDI over $500,000 between 2020 and 2021, while the State Department's Global Engagement Center similarly awarded the Global Disinformation Index $100,000 in taxpayer funds in 2021. That's a problem. That is these two government agencies, the National Endowment for Democracy, or it's government funded, and then the State Department's Global Engagement Center. So two little agencies funded by our tax money, giving money to the GDI, which then censoring anything, censoring people I agree with, that's wrong. Censoring people I disagree with, that's wrong. It's unconstitutional. These people don't know about the First Amendment. Therefore, that's the crime within the crime. It's one thing to be censored, very unconstitutional. It's another thing for your money to be used to censor you, or your money to be used to censor news outlets that you want to pay attention to. And of course, this censorship, it's a little bit of an indirect way of censoring. It's basically labeling, hey, you've got a risky score on your misinformation index. So it's not direct censorship where they're blacked out, you can't see them, or deplatformed, or otherwise silenced, but it's secondary censorship where people are coerced into paying attention to them less because there's misinformation labeled about their information. In other words, the GDI is a misinformation organization. I'm not a fan. And just one layer deeper. Meanwhile, the GDI released a report with help from researchers at the University of Texas, Austin called the Disinformation Risk Assessment, the online news market in the United States. Now, after that report, the Federalist filed a public records request at the University of Texas, Austin, demanding all communications related to the GDIL's work with the GDI on the news media's review. And it looks like the University of Texas, Austin tried to withhold those records, but ended up coming out. The files showed that the GDI paid the university to have student researchers with little training apply the organization's screening methodology to rate the various media outlets for its final report, which gave conservative news outlets low ratings. Then the GDI sold the university project to GDIL with the goal of influencing the 2022 midterms, the Federalist reported. And then finally, I think this is worth noting, it was revealed by internal files that GDI and GDIL were also working with the Biden State Department and other prominent public and private organizations to censor conservatives. A top lab manager at the project at University of Texas, Austin wrote in an internal email communication that GDI worked with governments, policymakers, social media platforms, and ad tech companies to defund disinformation. In truth, they weren't necessarily defunding disinformation, they were defunding outlets that they labeled as spreaders of disinformation. Big distinction. Just because you say it's so doesn't mean it's true. There's such a thing called lying there's such a thing called bias. They were defunding what they labeled as disinformation. They weren't defunding CNN, so I don't think these people are playing with a full deck of honest cards. That's the dumbest thing I could ever say. Well, there you have it. There is such a thing as the Global Disinformation Lab, and it receives funding from your tax money to censor you, censor media outlets that you want to pay attention to. Even if you didn't want to pay attention to them, it's unconstitutional. I, for one, I'm very grateful that the light was shined on this. It's corrupt, it's unconstitutional, and more of us need to be aware of what's going on, because corruption, it really can only survive in the dark. But when the light of awareness is shined on it, it starts to be starved of what it feeds off of: darkness and deception. So with that said, thank you for paying attention to the story with me. It's incredibly relevant because our freedom depends on free speech, and our free speech depends on us upholding our right to free speech, and also calling out and excommunicating anything that tries to violate our free speech. The GDIL is absolutely violating our free speech. If you're working at the GDIL, I want you to know I'm not a fan of you. Stop what you're doing. And with that said, I also want to thank Joy Mode. Are you a man? Now, I know that's a hard question to figure out, but if you are a man, have you ever wanted to increase your sexual performance in the bedroom? Or maybe you're a man and sometimes there's performance issues. Now, there doesn't have to be any shame in that. But unfortunately, there hasn't been good options for men who either want to just improve their sexual performance or overcome obstacles. You can go to the gas station and see these sketchy pills with a lot of harmful stuff in them, and they probably don't even work. Or you go get a prescription, which unfortunately can come with some pretty nasty side effects. Joy Mode is here to save the day, whether you're unhappy with your sexual performance or you're just looking to make it even better. Joy Mode Sexual Performance Booster for men is like pre-workout, but for sex. Joy Mode is an all-natural, nutrient-based formula designed by best-in-class scientists and chemists to improve sex drive and erection quality and firmness. Do you want to spice things up in the bedroom and boost your sexual performance and do it naturally without nasty prescription drugs? Well, we have a special offer for the JP audience. Just go to usejoymode.com/JP or enter JP at checkout for 20% off your first order. That's usejoymode.com/JP for 20% off your first order. Thank you, Joy Mode.